Welcome back to Startup Talk. I'm your host, the Startup Coach, and with me today is Kane Willmott, co-founder and CEO of IQ Offices. Welcome, Will.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
Will.
Thank you for
Welcome,
having
Kane.
me. Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg.
It's great to have you. It's great to have these discussions with founders that are doing things and making stuff happen and talk about their challenges and what worked for them and what didn't and share their insights with our listeners. So I like to start off with understanding what is IQ Offices and how is it different from other co-working spaces and office solutions on the market?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. I'm going to try and keep it brief. So just to say what co-working is, for those that aren't familiar with the concept, co-working is essentially like a hotel for businesses. So what we do is we take large spaces, we break them down into smaller spaces, so private offices, and then we lease out the private offices on flexible terms to a number of businesses. So that's what the concept is. That's very much a simplification of the business model. The business model really is about, and the core competency is getting people into the office space and creating highly engaged work environments to allow companies to attract and retain the best talent in the markets that we serve. That really is our core focus. Looking at our differences between other co-working spaces that are in the market, we really focus on the privacy element. We don't have a lot of transient offerings like dedicated desks and hot desks, those sort of things. We put sound attenuation devices within our offices. I'm in one of the offices right now. We have privacy screening. We have enhanced technology with firewalls and all kinds of things that really cater to the enterprise client. And that really is a lot of who our client is. Very successful companies across the country. So we're in Canada, or we're across Canada in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. And we're the largest Canadian-owned co-working operator in the country.
What inspired you to create IQ Offices and what specific problem were you aiming to solve when you launched?
Yeah, so I started in office leasing in 1998, 100 years ago. And then I started a number of brokerages before I started IQ. Because I had a brokerage background and I saw how complicated the transaction was for a traditional lease. And then I saw how Workspace transacted on the co-working side. It just seemed like it made so much sense. At the time, this was going back to 2011 when we were exploring this model. What I figured it was for small companies that couldn't afford the large office space, or it didn't make any financial sense for them to do it because they were too small. So like say a 6-person office makes no sense to go out and try and run 1,000 square feet. Why don't you just do it in a co-working space? The thinking on that has very much evolved, and the market has very much evolved since then, where these companies now are very much focused on creating focused on bringing people back to the office and creating environments where they can connect their teams together and really get great outcomes that they're looking for in their business. So it started with us looking at it from a math perspective, and the math worked. I looked at it from the friction perspective, and the friction made a lot of sense. At the time, Apple was like converting what was CDs into like digital files and those sort of things. So there was really a focus on a customer-centric approach to providing products and services, and that was really very much a trend. I still think it is, but the precipice was in that time period, 2009, 2010, 2011, when a lot of that was happening. And I saw how that could overlay on top of what co-working was, which you had a 70-page lease. You had to give this huge deposit. You had to go in and build out the space. You had to hire a lawyer and pay them $10,000 to review this document that the landlord gives you, which is totally skewed towards their interest and not yours. And you had to do all these things that were outside of your core business to get access to space. And like a fast deal would happen in 6 months. Fast deal. Whereas you can come into one of our spaces, you sign a 7-page agreement, and you could be working that afternoon. You could be working the next day. So it just made a ton of sense to me that this is going to be a model that's going to grow. This is something that makes a lot of sense. Real estate in general moves at a glacial pace. So I knew it was something that you might not see overnight, but I did think that we'd be moving in this direction, and we very much have since we started in 2012.
You mentioned IQ Offices has evolved since inception. How has it evolved? And what's your vision for the future?
Oh, mean, it's evolved in so many ways. Our first location, our biggest office was 6 people. And I was so stressed out about this office thinking, I think it was $5,500 a month. And I was like, who's going to pay $5,500 a month for this office? Like, oh, maybe I'm not like building it too big. And it ended up that was the fastest one, the first one to lease. That was the one that leased the longest. It always had the most demand in that location. And so I found that it very much wasn't intuitive going from our first location in terms of what we build. We got lucky, so lucky in so many ways, because we started this business in a time when WeWork had 2 locations in New York. We saw their second location in Soho. They really hadn't hit the scene as of yet. So there wasn't a lot of really differentiated product in the market when we started in Toronto. So when we built our first location, which is a building that was built in 1897, it's a gorgeous building on Yonge Street. Great location, beautiful little gem of a building. And that was so differentiated from everything else that was out there. Exposed brick and, like swing doors and 9-foot glass and sound attenuation. It was just so far beyond what else was out in the market. It was easy to differentiate. So, I mean, we had a Wix website and we had like no social media, and like we got away with so many things back in 2012 that if I was doing this, I was starting from scratch today, I wouldn't get away with it, because the market is just so much more sophisticated now than it was back then. And that speaks to what your question about, how's it evolved? It's become much more sophisticated. The customers become more sophisticated. They understand the value prop much better than they did back in 2012. Like I would have tours in 2012 where people would say, this is a great idea. How'd you come up with it? And, it's been a concept that's been around a very long time. So it dates back to the 50s. So, over time, what you've seen is a sophistication of the operator. The offering has gotten better over time. And then you've seen a sophistication of the client, where the covenant's getting better. When I say covenant, I mean larger and larger companies are utilizing this product and services. So what we're seeing, especially after COVID, is we're seeing more and more very large companies that have what they call a flex strategy within their real estate portfolio. So they want to be in a co-working space. They recognize that what they can do in Cupertino, California, in 400,000 square feet, they can't replicate in, as in a 40-person office, in 5,000 square feet, even 10,000 square feet. So when you leverage the expertise of a co-working spaces in a market where this company doesn't have a head office, they get to offer their employees in that market a similar experience to what they would experience if they were in the head office. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing that didn't exist in the same way that we saw pre-COVID. In addition to that, co-working used to be a stepping stone to a long-term lease. And now we're finding that there's a reversion on that. So now we're finding people are letting go of long-term leases and going into co-working spaces. So that's there was a backflow preventer on that for a period of time, because there's friction in trying to get out of a long-term lease and then matching up your timelines with a co-working space. So, and just a lot of costs, furniture, and all the things that you need to invest in order to create an office space. So, for companies to do that, they have to realize that there's a significant amount of sunk costs to go from that into a co-working space. But now companies are realizing the sunk costs. They, are paying for all this office space that they weren't using. They're still paying for office space that they aren't using. So they recognize that, okay, I just got to put that behind me. And going into the future now, we got to stay more agile, and we got to outsource this to the professionals, to the companies that focus on this as their core competency, so we can focus on ours.
Before IQ Offices, you opened multiple real estate brokerages. Mm-hmm. I like Steve Jobs saying you can only connect the dots looking backwards. How did those experiences prepare you for the challenges of running a co-working business?
That is a great question. And I love that quote from Steve Jobs. So I think everything that you do, like when you look back in your career and you look at like, what did you learn as you went through these processes? Again, I've been very lucky. My first brokerage that I started with a business partner that I was his assistant. I started in the real estate business, and then he decided in less than a year that he was going to go off and start his own brokerage. So I got to experience starting a company with almost zero risk, because I was new in the business. I was young. I didn't have a lot of expenses. And I also had him writing the check for the entire business. And I very much thank him for that. But it allowed me to go through the process of building a company from scratch. Everything, every aspect, the accounting, the hiring, structures, standard operating procedures, finding space, like all the things that we needed to do. And that has really served me well, because over time you have access to some of this information and this experience that you've done in the past. And I think likely I worked at a large accounting firm when I first got out of university. It very much wasn't a fit. But you have to learn a lack of structure. You have to learn to really kind of like roll with the punches. And most importantly, you have to burn the boats, right? Like the Vikings used to, when they would take a beach or go to an island or land, what they would do is they would burn the boats and then they would swim to shore. And so there was no going back. There was no way to go back. And, having started multiple companies, every single time it was burning the boats, right? There was no going back, because once you dive in, you have to figure it out. There is no plan B. You just have to make sure it works. And through that, there's so many learnings, because you have to, first of all, have to learn to have tenacity. You have to learn to be creative in problem solving and solutions. But in addition to that, you have to gain that mindset so that you can take that with you into that next business. One of the great things about starting a business and running a business is that you have so many challenges that come up along the way, but quitting is never an option. It just never is. So it doesn't enter the equation when you're thinking about how do I solve this, and that's certainly something that served me well as we were going through the other business. In addition to just the pure tactics of starting a company, all the different elements, the accounting, the marketing, the operations, the different functions that you need in order to start and run a successful company.
What were some of your toughest challenges that you faced building IQ offices, and how did you navigate through them?
Well, I would say COVID was the biggest challenge we had. COVID, like by far, was the biggest challenge we had. There was no form of any business plan that I'd ever put together that contemplated going through a pandemic where it was going to be against the law to use our workspace if you weren't an essential service. That was not part of the equation. So I definitely was not expecting that to happen. That was a very difficult time because we had to figure out how to keep the company running. We had a lot of fixed expenses that we had to incur during that period of time. We had to look at, and it was very much a learning. We had to look at what did we need to do and how did we need to make changes in the organization through that period of time to ensure that we could survive, because it was very much survival. And in a lot of ways, we got to the point where we had a lot of structure and we had a lot of staff and we had a lot of infrastructure. And I would say through that, it reinforced to me what is the most important thing in any business, which is people. It's always people. And we had always invested in people, in having a high staff to member ratio, meaning that on site at a location, we would have more staff per member than you would typically see in our industry. And because of that, and the reason why we had that is because we wanted to make sure it's about the human connected experience. That's what makes our spaces special. Like what you see behind me, any architect can quantify and build. It's not that hard. Anyone can sign a lease. Anybody can replicate what you see. What you don't see is the service culture, the service mindset, and how our staff and everyone within IQ cares deeply about each other and our members. And when we went into COVID, because we had that structure in place and we had all of those relationships and we had built that trust with our members, we were able to work through to get through to the other side. And so we did all kinds of different things to get there and to help out our members during COVID, to get to the other side, to make sure that they were taken care of, to make sure that they were safe during that period of time, to make sure that we also too had a sustainable business. And I would say it was really telling in so many ways, because first of all, our members became our partners in a lot of ways. A lot of members said hey, I know this is tough for you guys. I know that this has got to be excruciating. And we're like, yes, absolutely it is. But we're not, but also we got to figure out what makes sense for you too, in the context of making sure that we keep this business alive, that we all survive together, right, on this. And we had, we just had so many grand gestures of kindness through that period of time. Because of that. And it was all because of those relationships. It was all those investment in people during that period of time. And it just reinforced what I believed going into COVID, which is it is all about the people, and you got to create amazing experiences for each other. That's really what it's all about. We mean to do that first for all of our staff. I like to say when people start at IQ, this may not be your last job, but I want this to be your best job. That's what, because we want this to be an environment that you love what you do. That's very important to us. And then by extension, that translates into a service offering for our members where they feel that caring and they feel that connection. And that's really what draws people to the office. Interestingly enough, and I mean, maybe it seems obvious, but it's not beautiful space. It really isn't. Beautiful space is great, but it really isn't that. It's the people. That's why people get in the GO train and drive downtown and do all and spend $20 for lunch and everything else, because they want to be around the people that they see when they're here.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think it's a combination of the two things. I think they come because they need a place. The initial, I need a meeting room, I need a place to have a call, I'm downtown in between meetings, I need it. And then once they've tried it, they're like, oh, I'm here. I can now, during my coffee break, I can talk to like people about the basketball game and this and that. I'm not working by myself, but not only that, it's the community and expertise around you. I remember working out of the co-working space that I use, talking to the Google Ads expert across the way when I had questions for my client, and there was a couple of legal people around that you could ask questions about quickly about that stuff, and social media and different companies that quickly you had all the skills you needed that you could grab over coffee or a quick meeting just in your office that you're friends with, that really felt like you were part of something bigger than you are. And I think that's what makes people stay. A lot of times I think they arrive because they think I need a space to work, and they realize what they really needed was all these other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned that people come first. So emphasizing the importance of purpose-led teams. What's your approach to fostering a culture of engagement and purpose at IQ offices?
It is all about, living it. It's all about when you look at what the purpose is behind what it is that we do. So we create amazing days at work. That's what we want to do. We want to create these amazing experiences for you when you come to the office. We want you to do your best work when you're at IQ. We want you to feel valued. We want you to know that we care. And that's really what it's all about. And when you look at our ability to affect so many people, because we have over 400 offices within our portfolio. And so, our on-site teams are able to affect someone's day by the way they greet them in the morning, by what they know about them, by the way that they connect with them on site, by the way they remove, I'll go back to friction again, the friction around workspace, whenever there's challenges related to internet or computer or whatever the case may be, that they're taking care of that. That really is what it's all about. And what we see is we see feedback. We see feedback from our members. And I say this to our staff when we do onboarding, because I onboard every single one of our staff members when we have new staff members come to IQ. When members come to me and talk about the business, they sometimes will talk about the spaces and how beautiful they are and the great buildings they're in and that sort of thing. But that may be 10% of the conversation. 90% of the conversation is all about, how do you find such amazing people? How did you find this person? How did you find that person? They are just so good. They are so attentive. They're so caring. I feel like they're part of our team, right? And that is, that kind of feedback that we get, and we share that feedback, and we have wow moments that we share with the teams, and and the things that we can do that are really special and thoughtful and meaningful to our members. That is really behind the purpose of what we do. And it really shows in the people that we hire and the people that we have at IQ, because the people that we have want to serve. That's really what it comes down to. They want to serve. They want you to have an amazing day. They will do this without the praise, but the praise comes, and they just go on and on about this. And it just reinforces to me, again, going back to the people, that the people are so important. But when you go into the office every day, and unlike working at a traditional company where you have your set group of staff, you have different groups coming in. Some people are coming in for a workspace for a day. Some people are an office for a day. Some people are coming in for a meeting room. Some people have been with us for 5 years and more, right? And you're able to affect their day, in something that's very important to them, which is their time, when they're at work and when they're achieving, that is something that you see immediate results on. You can see that people value it, right? And that's something that they get in the way of feedback, and the way that I get in feedback and that we share with each other. It really is something where it's the opposite of a thankless job. Let's say that, to give just a small example, my father works in property management, and he always talks about it like, no one ever calls to say, you know what, hey, the toilets are working great, just wanted to let you know, right? And and the heat's great and that sort of thing. It's kind of a thankless job. People just call you when things are going wrong. With working at IQ is the exact opposite of that. Like, we have so many opportunities to create these wow moments, to create these connections with our members that are really meaningful, that give you almost immediate feedback, right? Constantly, every single day. And so when you come into the office on Monday, that like you're going to see these people, you're going to talk to them about what's going on the weekend. It's like, these are like friends. These are people that you care about. These are people that you want to spend time with, right? And when you have an infrastructure around you that allows you to create this great environment for them, it becomes very meaningful, and it becomes exciting, and it's something that everybody gathers around, that purpose. And so this is what our on-site staff do, and what I do is I support them. I support a team of head office that supports them. That's really what it comes down to, because we're all going for that same goal, right? So very much we talk about it, we live it, every single day. And that really is what is the purpose, and what and it really is what drives people, and what aligns people in a company.
So everything's going along in your business great. Same with mine. And then all of a sudden COVID comes along and people can't get together anymore. Running an event business, all of a sudden you can't do those things. And, co-working, all of a sudden there's new rules about space and people and all those things. Now we live in a new generation where so many people are working from home, and they're very reluctant to come back into the office. And enterprises are trying to figure out, well, we have all this space. What's the right size to have? Do we have everybody back in the office all the time? Do we rotate between people? Do I need 30% of my real estate when I'm distributed? Do I need a co-working space for people to come in? There's a lot more questions than it used to be. And it's a real number on the expense sheet, as you mentioned. And some of these things are long-term contracts. So these companies have to, like you said, earn the commute to get either new employees or whatever to come into the office on whatever frequency they need. How is IQ offices earning the commute?
Yeah, it really goes back to the people again. I'm kind of really reiterating that over and over again. But it really is about the service offering. It's about being in a location that's very accessible, that allows people to multiple forms of communication or transportation, to get to the location. Great amenities when they're there, having access to great amenities. So we locate in downtown, like financial districts and downtown business districts. That is our primary focus. That is our focus in terms of our locations in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. So we look at that, like, how do people get to the space? Very important. So in terms of earning the commute, doing everything you can to make that space or that building accessible through multiple forms of transportation is very important. And then beyond that, it's really what the experience is when you're on site. One of the great things about a co-working space is that, to your point about getting people back to the office, and some people work some days and some people don't work other days, and looking at the distributed teams and flexible workspace and hybrid and all these sort of things is very complicated. It's very complicated, and because you have all those factors. Not only is it complicated, but it's also ever changing, because you'll have the turnover in the company and those sort of things. So what one person and different lifestyles, different things happen. Someone has a baby, and now they have a different situation than they had last year, and now they want something different. So for a company to try and figure out how much space they actually need is extremely difficult in this environment, and I believe it will be into the future. But what also is very difficult is taking a 10,000 square foot space and trying to activate it for 30 people. Because you walk into that space and it's like walking into a restaurant. It can be the most beautiful restaurant that you go into. And if you got 3 tables that have people sitting at it, you're like, this place has no vibe. and it's not about the music, and it's not about the build out, and it's not about the location, and and it's not about the menu. It's all about who's in the space, right? So when you look at an office space, it's the same thing. So if you have 10,000 square feet, it's like, and I've actually seen this happen from occupiers where they say, oh, this is in this environment, this crazy sublease is so cheap, I'm going to take 50% more space. I'm like, you do realize by taking 50% more space, you are creating this cavernous environment that is going to be absolutely horrible for your staff. And it's not going to earn the commute. And they're going to go to the space and it's going to be depressing. And they're not going to want to go there every day. So with a co-working space, what companies can do is they can, obviously turn over all the activation to us. But beyond that, they don't have to take more space than they need. They can define the requirement from now for the next year, for the next 6 months, and then they can adjust. So if lifestyles change, things change, staffing changes, the company decides you want everybody in the office 5 days a week, or you want them 2 days a week, or you want them 1 day a week, whatever the case may be, things change over time. We're in an ever-changing environment. And when you have office space, workspace that caters to that, so that when people come into the space, they don't have this cavernous environment. They have this beautiful space. They have this space that fits their needs for the amount of people that are going to be in that space. And then when they walk outside of that space, they also there's energy. There's energy because there's people in the amenity spaces, right? So that's kind of a long answer, Craig, to like how you earn the commute. Like it's not a silver bullet. It's not one thing. It's like, it's a number of the things, but it's curating an experience is what it really comes down to, and making the space accessible and easy to get to. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Craig.
I was on mute. Thank you.
Aha.
Definitely, as a person who runs events, I often will change the room I'm in based on the number of people that are coming. Like I normally have, say, 150 person room, but this event I've only got 75 people. So I'm going to switch to a much smaller room because it's going to feel like a much more lively, intimate event because people are closer together, and versus a cavernous one where people are really spread out thinking, well, nobody's here. It really changes the mindset. And in co-working, you need the right balance of open space, drop-in space, office space. It's interesting to get that right because everyone has different needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go a little further with your event analogy, right? So you start planning an event. At the beginning of planning that event, you don't know how many people you're going to have at the event, right? And then as you start to get closer to the event date, you get a little bit of a better idea of how many. You have an idea of course going in, but you don't know, right? And then ultimately, when you get closer to the event, you have to look at curating that space in a way that makes it feel lively, right? So you do that in events. It's done in restaurants. Restaurants usually are set up so they can block off sections, so they can squeeze it, right? And have you ever seen an office like that? Have you ever seen like a 10,000 square foot office space where they're able to like shrink, make it bigger, do these sort of things, right? Like it's like, and no, because like if you look at the traditional floor plan, it's open space, offices, meeting rooms, reception. That's every single office, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I think for office for so long, it was just like, it was office space by default. It's like, I have a company, I have 100 people, I need 100 square feet. I'm going to get 10,000 square feet. And there you go. Boom. Right. Like we're done. We're just going to go and get that. That's what you do. And I'm going to tell every single one of my employees that they need to be there, from 8 till 6, whatever it is, right? Monday to Friday. That's just what it was. And now the office is not seen as being a necessary expense. It's seen as being an investment to drive engagement, right? So with that change in mindset, you have to give consideration to the venue, right? And I think in a lot of ways, it's extremely difficult to do with the product and the inventory. There's just a lot of antiquated inventory out there. And it's very difficult to create that cordoned off and lively experience in a workspace for one company. It's just very, very difficult to do. So I think like in the fullness of time, you will see more and more office buildings being activated in the way where they have these amenities that get people together, that, create that human connection, that create the vibe within the space. And then people will have their offices, but the office will just be a workspace component of what they do. you know, because when you start to connect the two together, that's where it becomes interesting. So if I walk into the lobby of an office building and it looks like one of your events where you know it's like everybody's there and it's bumping and things are happening, you're like, this is amazing, I love being here. And then you go to your workspace and you get to see all like the people that you work with, your friends, right? And it's the right size for you. But then you can go out of your office space and go back to that bumping space that you wanted to go to, right? Like you have this experience. So I think, you know, you're going to see more and more of that. We're seeing it in other markets. We're seeing it in some US markets where landlords are doing it. It's just, it's very much a different business model than what landlords traditionally do. So it's very difficult. And it's very difficult for them to do because it's a different business model, number one. But number two, they're not set up for success either, because all the way down the chain, all everybody wants is a bond. They want an office building to look like a bond. They want you to sign a 10-year lease so they can go out and get a 10-year mortgage, right? And that so they can go out and get the investment based on a valuation that's based on the commitment and the quality of the credit from that tenant for the next 10 years. That's how the whole thing's set up. And when you all of a sudden go in and say, no, we're going to do shorter terms, we're like, I don't like, very few office users would say to you, oh, I would way rather, I don't want the 7-page. I would rather do a 70-page. Can you give me a 70-page that is totally skewed towards your interest so that I could hire a lawyer and pay them $10,000 to try and figure out what this means? Like, no one ever is ever going to say that. In addition to that, people don't want to build out their own space. They don't want to solve the technology issues. They don't want to be thinking about like, what's the new technology things, access control. They don't want to be thinking about like, what's the newest printer or what kind of circuit do I want in this space? These are all things that take away people's focus from their core business. And in addition to that, when you're doing that in a long-term office space, it takes you away from your core business. And just like we talked about, the structure of those spaces are just, they don't set up these companies for success to earn the commute. And I think that's what we saw back in 2011 when we explored this, in 2012 when we opened our first location, but it's more true today than it's ever been. And because there's just so much complexity in terms of providing people space, getting people into the space, you have to sell it. Like as a business owner, if you want to have people in the office, you can dictate it. Of course you can. You can mandate it and say you got to be in the office 5 days a week. But if you think of it more like a restaurant owner and say, how do I get everybody in the space? How do I get everybody here? What do I need to do to really get them here, other than just telling them they have to be here? And you think about like, what kind of environment do I have to create that's going to earn the commute? It's going to be a very different conversation. And I think you'll get very different results out of the people that you're bringing to the space.
Your recent survey uncovered insights about what motivates Canadians to return to the office. Can you share some of the most surprising findings?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll just read a couple of these out to you. So we did this survey. What we wanted to, let me tell you why we did the survey. So there's a lot in the paper about people not wanting to come back to the office, and you know, like the Fed and you know Amazon, and there's a number of large occupiers that have said they want to have everybody back to the office 5 days a week. And there was a lot of people saying that they didn't want to do it for a lot of different reasons. But what we hadn't heard, and when I looked in the media, I just did not see a lot of tangible, quantifiable information that would lead us to understand why. Why do people not want to go to the office? You can make the assumption that it's because they want to work out of their pajamas or walk their dog in the middle of the day and all those sort of things. And maybe that's true to some extent. But I believe that there may be a supply side issue, right? That we're not recognizing here. And maybe there is a way to get people back to the office. And maybe when people say they don't want to come to the office, we shouldn't make assumptions that we know why they're saying they don't want to come back to the office. And I think it's easy to jump to conclusions on that. So we put this survey together to understand and ask people, what is it about your workspace? You're coming back to the office space, mandated, whatever the case may be. What is it about your workspace that makes it attractive, not attractive? What would get you there? So we did this. It was an independent survey. We commissioned it. And a couple things. So 54% said of the survey respondents said that their workspace was outdated, and 47% say that it's out of touch with their existing needs. So when you look at that, that's, you know, the 54% that it's outdated and it doesn't work for their needs. You're essentially cutting out half of your workforce, saying that it's a supply side problem. The workspace doesn't work. You're asking me to come back to the workspace, but the workspace doesn't work. In addition to that, when you take it a step further and say like, okay, fine. But what would draw you back to the office? What are the elements? We talked about going back to the earn the commute. Like what is it that would draw you back to the office? And this was really interesting. So 76% of Canadians say a well-designed office space with perks, snacks, beverages, central location, and amenities would entice them to return to the office. So over 3/4 said, yeah, I would go if it was worth going, basically, right?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I just want to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
I've talked about this on several occasions, and there's always listeners who come at me when I talk about food is one of the most motivating things to get people in the office. You know, it's not money, it's food. And because, you know, you assume you're already getting paid a certain amount, right?
Yeah.
Enough to make you work and stuff. So there's at that level, but
Yeah.
the donuts, the snacks, the this and that. And your survey just proves my point yet again. But a lot of times people come at me say, no, money's not going to motivate me, whatever, ever. But maybe there's a case individually, but what makes people happy is that shared experiences, and that food brings people together.
So you nailed it, Craig. So that is one of the things that was surprising to me. It wasn't intuitive. Like the people that we have in our space, these are all high income earners. Okay. So a free sandwich doesn't really matter to them. You know, they don't care about saving $10, right? But I will tell you that people congregate around food. So we have a breakfast offering in the morning where we put out, bagels and pastries and juice and yogurt and people go because they want the food, but the food becomes what connects the people together because everybody comes down to get the food, right? It's the concept of breaking bread together, right? You connect with someone when you break bread together, right? And it takes that and multiplies it into a community where people are getting together around the food. So when you create this curated food experience, it is really interesting to look at like the human behavior, like how that works. So we have snacks like healthy snacks that we put out in all of our kitchens, and we call them like a trail mix snack bar. So people can get these things all day long. So if you're a little bit hungry in the afternoon, you can grab that, or throughout the day. That's not what does it. Like, not the snacks. What does it is when we put the food out in the morning, we say breakfast is available in the morning, come on out in the morning. What does it is when we do happy hour on Thursdays, it's for 1 hour. And we have everybody come down between 3:30 and 4:30, and our lounges are bumping, right? And it's because we have food, and we have a couple of drinks that are available to them when they come down. And people congregate around that. The food and beverage offering is just so important, and it's something that we have very much invested in heavily, especially on the other side of COVID, even more so. So you talk about trends and the future. The food and beverage offering very much is very important. And markets that are leading the co-working industry, like London and Sydney, two places I've been in the last year, they all have extensive food and beverage offerings. At our new location at 302 Bay Street, we have a full-time barista at that location that provides complimentary coffee and snacks, and we have a full-time barista in Montreal, and they create this really connected, really great experience.
Yeah, every time something like that where there is a full-time barista there's a lot of conversations happening in the line waiting for their coffee. People don't mind waiting that 5 minutes or whatever it takes because one, it's the experience, and two, it's a connection. They're not walking up and walking away. It's taking the time to connect with people and having that experience. And honestly, I think people really haven't analyzed this enough. It's the multi-sensual experience of the food, the drink, the people, the emotion that really gets the endorphins flowing for humans and makes that connection matter and happen. And it's a combination of those things. People don't realize it's not the food, it's the endorphin rush you get from having that the bite of that first donut, as well as talking to these people, and the good vibe and all this stuff happening connects you to that workplace and that culture.
100%. So, and like you talk about all the things together, I always think about five senses, right? Like all these things, and to relate that to events, Craig, like think about all the things that you have going. All they do is they walk in and they see lots of people there. That's like, as an attendee to an event, right? I walk in, I see lots of people there. I thought, the organizer did a good job on this because they got so many people here, right? That's it. What you don't realize is that there's a huge budget on AV, right? To create this music, those big screens that you see, and then in some instances, like you're piping in some custom scents into the air, like they do that at hotels, right? And there's so much going on behind the curtain. It's not one thing, it's all the things, right? That create that experience. When you put on one of these events, and at IQ, we're putting on that event every day. And it's always about it's a lot of times it's what you don't see that creates that cultivating environment, right? In terms of like bringing that food in, but designing spaces so that you don't have choke points and where people get left out on their own, and creating spaces so that they encourage the connection when people get into that space. So there's just all those elements that you really have to put together to make it a successful event, and for us to make it a successful workday.
What generational differences or attitudes did you get from the survey?
So that was interesting too. So let's go back to the stat that I thought was so interesting, that 76% of people would go back to the office. So we drilled down further on that and said, okay, that's interesting. But now let's drill it down by generation. So we found out that Gen Zers, 92% said they would go to the office. For all the things you and I just talked about, which was the snacks, the beverages, the central location, the amenities. For millennials, it was 83%. And for Gen Xers, it was 69%. So it was still a high percentage. And I suspect it has to do with lifestyle. So Gen Xers just, they have kids, and like millennials are having kids, obviously, now as well. And, but the one thing I see in that to me is a little bit troubling is that the Gen Xers, like me, had the benefit of working in an office every single day with a highly skilled mentor that taught me everything that I know. And the fact that people in my age bracket are less engaged to the office, I believe that does a disservice. I mean, we're talking about 69%, so this is not like a small percentage, but I'm saying there's a variance. I'm saying there's the Gen Zers, the people that are coming into the workforce, 92% of them say, like, give me the right office, give me the right circumstance. I'd love to come to the office, right? And a smaller percent of the Gen Zers. So, my hope is that over time, the in-person interaction, the benefit that you get of being close to other people in your space, how much you learn from being around other people. I mean, we're pack animals, right? Like, there's a reason why that we don't all live in cabins up in Northern Canada where you can buy a place for $100,000. We all live in the city where you buy a place for a crazy amount of money because we all want to be together. That's the reality, right? So if we can create these environments, and then we can attract everybody and have them come into the office, I just think it's a better situation for all involved. Subject, of course, to lifestyle. I mean, people have obligations; they got to take care of those obligations, and we all understand that. And absolutely, companies should be making a situation where they're taking care of those of people's needs that they have outside of the office, of course. But I do think in person is very important. I'm super biased. I'm super biased because I'm first of all in the workspace business, and I also grew up in a very office-centric environment, so throughout my career. But what's interesting is you would expect it would go the other way. Like, maybe the Gen Zers would say, well, I don't want to, I can talk, I can text people. I'm comfortable with technology. I've never been in an office. I haven't been in an office for 30 years, right? Like, I'm good. I'll work from home. That's cool. But it's actually not. It's not the case. It's that those people want to come to the office because they're seeing the benefits of being in the office. And a big part of that is being around the people that can mentorship them.
Yeah. And I think in the last several years, mentorship and coaching has taken a hit for a number of reasons. Let's hope that it does get back. And you're right about you're missing stuff if you're not in the office because, you don't know what goes on when they mute the phone. You're not talking to your boss when you go get a coffee in between, calls in the meetings. There's a lot of conversations that don't happen. And when that project or that job or that raise comes up, the vision or image in your boss's head isn't the phone or whatever. It's the person they've been talking to this whole time. So you miss there's something missing from not being in the room. And it's funny. You got to take advantage of your space. And I guess I've always done this. When I was a project manager at Davis and Henderson, I would sit in the kitchen area. They had all these standing tables and whatever. I'd sit at one of them in the morning while people were going to get the coffee. And my boss came to me one day and he says, I always see you here in the morning. Like, why are you here? And I said, just sit with me for 10 minutes. And in 10 to 15 minutes, I got all my project updates from all the people on my project teams who went and got their morning coffee. I didn't have to call them. I didn't have to do them. Say, hey, I was this, and all of a sudden the light bulb went on. He's like, oh, okay, off he went. And it's just taking advantage of that situation where, people congregate, you can get their updates. You're not having to call them. You're not interrupting their work. And everybody's in a very comfortable environment. So I think there's definitely advantages to being at the office that we don't experience when we're remote, even though we have some great tools to culturally keep that connection.
Yeah. Thank God we had the technology through COVID. Because back when I started in 98, I had a desk with a massive computer on it and a phone and a cell phone that was costing me $4 a minute, right? So imagine if we had went through COVID in that environment, right? That it would have been horrible, right? So the technology is a great way for us to stay updated. I think, it is a good way to connect. We have offices in Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver, and I'm based out of Toronto, so I travel to those markets, but I'm able to see them every Friday, right? We can hop on a Zoom call and I can see them. So it's great, and I love that technology. But what I will say, and what I have experienced, is when we as a group are in the office together, we move faster. Because I don't have to schedule a Zoom call with you when you have an opening on your calendar in 3 days from now to talk about the thing that's on my mind. I just want to walk to your desk and I want to ask you a question, and you can probably answer it like that. And either we have something to explore, or maybe we don't have anything to explore, right? But we can move so quickly when we're in the office together. And I don't necessarily think that means that everybody's got to be in the office 5 days a week. I think what is somewhat unfair is that when I started in 98, when I left, I still did work, but not to the same extent now. I mean, I always have my phone with me all the time, right? So there's a different expectation, right? And I wouldn't say expectation. I would say there's a difference in mindset of, because you have this phone on you, and you got that email at 10 o'clock at night. You're like, I want to respond to this. I just want to do this and get it done, right? And so having people go into the office and be present in the office and then go home to their families and not be present, that doesn't work either, right? So I think there can be a great balance. I really do. I think there can be a great balance where everybody's schedules and needs can be accommodated, but there's still an opportunity to be in the office together and have really very meaningful time together. And it can be compressed. It could be quality versus quantity, right? In terms of the time that people spend together. And that's something that we're able to offer, because you don't have to have an office manager that's there when no one else is, right? Because, that space will keep running even if you're not in that day. That's okay, right? You still have your workspace. It's still going to be amazing when you walk into it. If you decide to go in on Monday, or if you don't decide to go in on Monday, it's still running, right? And so that's a big benefit. And I think that's, it's something on the other side of COVID that it's something that we're doing to serve our members that wasn't really there before COVID, because there just wasn't that same amount of complexity. So I think in a lot of ways, the technology and COVID created a freedom a freedom and a mindset that we didn't have before, which I think is a benefit for everyone. But I think also too, if we can solve the supply gap, which is what that survey says, I think we can create also these environments where we can get the most out of in-person interactions.
What advice would you give entrepreneurs who are looking to disrupt traditional industries or creative, innovative solutions?
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, always be curious. I think that's always, always be curious and open-minded. I think that is at the heart of recognizing opportunity. And so if you can always stay curious, always ask questions, and be open to opportunities. So when opportunities come, really, explore them and spend the time on them, and be positive and overly optimistic, because you have to be that way and not see all the big things that are in front of you to make things happen, and just break it down, chunk it down, and do one step at a time. But one of the things I do say for young entrepreneurs that approach me and talk about my journey as being an entrepreneur, I say, and I wish I had done this, because I'm saying, say what I say, but not what I did, but what I do now is spend time to really get to know yourself and understand where you create the most value, your personality type. Like, I like the Myers-Briggs. I just think it is absolutely, for me and for a number of people that I've introduced to it, it has been such an amazing tool for people to better understand themselves. Because I did the test, I've done it many times. I always get the same thing, ENFP. And there's so much literature on that personality type to say, like, you are like this, and this is what you're good at, and this is what you're not good at, and this is where this is where you find challenges, this is where you thrive, and these sort of areas. And if you spend some time to really understand what it is that is your superpower, what makes you special, based on what's easy and what comes easy to you. Don't try, like, everything's going to be hard. You don't have to start with it being hard. It's going to get hard later anyway, right? But start with doing something that comes easy to you, that is very much in line with your personality. And I'll give you an example. When I got out of university in 1996, there was no jobs. We were in the middle of a recession, and I got offered a sales job with Chubb Security. And I thought, I didn't go to university and rack up $50,000 worth of student debt so that I could go and sell security systems. So I decided I was going to go back to school and become an accountant. If I had just done that, and I lived through a year of pain, like severe pain. It was the worst job I've ever had in my entire life. And it's not because it was bad people. It was because I was so not suited to that job. I'm good at math, but I am terrible at sitting down and just doing, very detail-oriented work for a very long period of time without social interaction. And if I had understood that about myself, I never would have went down that path. I would have, instead of just seeing the benefits of being a CA and maybe a CFO someday and all those things that I had the sight lines to at that point, or that I was looking for, I would have recognized that that's not what I should have done. And afterwards, people are telling me, it's like, I can't believe you even went in that. Like, why would you have done that? And it's because I just didn't know myself well enough. I really just didn't. I didn't value the uniqueness of my personality and the uniqueness of other people's personality. So usually what you see that I'm not good at this and I'm not good at that. And you're like, I want to get better at this and I want to get better at that. And if you recognize that this is just not in your DNA, you can do it. You can get away with it for a while, but that's not going to come easy to you. And if you are going to try and compete with someone else that comes easy to you, they're going to eat your lunch all day long. Right. So figure out what you're good at and then bring that, so look for those opportunities, but bring your superpower. Like, yeah, you have like me, I have shortcomings, like as long as my arm, but I can tell you that I understand what they are. I'm always learning. I don't understand everything, but I so much better now understand than I did when I was in my 20s, where I bring value and where I don't. And I try to be very mindful of my communication with other people, because I know I think differently in a lot of ways. And I know that can be also frustrating for other people. And so that helps me to be a better communicator. It helps me to be a better leader. It helps me to be a better partner. And it just helps me to perform better and offer more of myself to my team, because I'm in the place, in the organization where I create the most amount of value. So if you know that up front, and then you see the opportunity and you say, I'm going to do this thing, you should look at what that superpower is. And if you're not good at it, hire it. Like, figure out a way, give them equity, like if you can't afford it, figure out a way to bring in someone that complements your personality, that has different skill sets, so that you can do what you do really well. And that is very much a recipe for success.
This has been a great conversation. I love talking to you about the origins of IQ Offices. Where can our audience go to learn more about you and IQ Offices?
Yeah, so IQ Offices is iqoffices.com. Just go to the website and you can see, all about us and our locations and what it is that we do and what it is we offer. I'm on LinkedIn, so just look me up on LinkedIn, Kane_Willmott after LinkedIn, and that'll get my profile. And we'd love to have any of the listeners reach out and and help in any way we can.
I really appreciate you taking the time, Kane, out of your busy day to share your experiences with our listeners.
It's my pleasure, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.